Hello and welcome to the AnsweRED podcast. My name is Paweł Burza, and as always, I am joined by the Bear Witcher himself, Sebastian Kalemba.
Thanks a lot, Burza. Hello, everyone. And we have a treat today, our 9th episode, and we are meeting with the lore, meaning Patrick Mills, our franchise content strategy lead, and Cian Maher, who is a franchise and lore designer.
Yeah, it's going to be a great episode. I can't wait to meet the guys, so let's go straight into them.
Let's go.
All right, guys, welcome to the podcast. Pleasure to have you. Patrick and Cian, our lore experts and franchise experts also. So you're part of a new team that has
relatively new.
Relatively new.
It's like 2 years old.
Yeah. What's up with us creating a franchise and lore team?
So at the end of Cyberpunk 2077, when we were getting ready to work on Phantom Liberty, I was a quest designer on Cyberpunk and on Witcher 3, and on Cyberpunk I had actually done a lot of the world building stuff, and was responsible for, working with Mike Pondsmith and like incorporating the source material and figuring out how all that would work. And it wasn't really approached in a very structured way. It was kind of ad hoc, and it was kind of, I was a quest designer, but also doing this other thing. Which meant that I didn't have as much time for either of those tasks as probably I needed. So at the end of Cyberpunk's development, I went to Adam Bodowski, our co-CEO, and I told him, hey, this is what I want to do. I want to actually create a team to do structured world building. I want to do it for Cyberpunk, but I think we should be doing this for Witcher as well. And he said, yes, absolutely. At the same time, in marketing, there was this desire to have a franchise team that would be responsible for branding our franchises as well. And so those jobs kind of blended together. I got this job. I started building a team. Marcin Batilda was our first hire on that. He's our senior lore master on The Witcher. We then later hired Cian, who is also a lore master on Witcher. And we've been working on that. And so our responsibilities are like lore and world building, maintaining like continuity or some idea of continuity, but also working on a lot of like branding and franchise and licensing stuff. So whenever you see like Siri show up in Fortnite, for example, that's our team working on that. So we work both on the games themselves, but then also on the branding and licensing end of things.
All right, guys, but it's a 2-year-old baby. Can you tell us a bit more about, how it grew in a recent 2 years? How does it happen?
Sure. Well, like I said, at the beginning it was actually just me, but I knew that I needed to hire a Witcher lore master. Marcin Batilda is someone who's been working with our studio for a long time as a contractor. He wrote The World of The Witcher and The World of Cyberpunk, and he is very well known. He was suggested actually to us by our VP of Narrative, Marcin Blaha, saying, this guy's really good. You need to talk to him. So we talked to Batilda. He came in, absolutely blew us away in the interview. To be honest, when we went in for that interview, it was mostly me explaining the job to him and then saying, do you want it? Because to be honest, when he walked in, he kind of already had the job because he had come so highly recommended. And I think that, one of the things that I hear pretty frequently is that the only person who actually might know more about The Witcher than Marcin Batilda is Andrzej Sapkowski. And even then, it's probably really close.
Yeah, that's true.
And so
I heard that.
He was absolutely great hire and has been doing a great job. He definitely needed some help because there was a lot of responsibilities. We've got a lot going on with The Witcher. So we reached out to Cian, who, I don't know, we'll talk about backgrounds and things. I don't want to take anything away from you. I'm doing all the talking right now. But tell us about your interest in The Witcher. I'm not supposed to ask the questions, but
how did you join then?
Yeah, tell us about that.
I joined, I think, because I incessantly posted about The Witcher on Twitter for several years, and Patrick followed me. And I think one day, Horizon were hiring for a lore historian was the job title. And I shared that and said, oh, like, imagine this was for The Witcher. That'd be the best thing ever. And then Patrick messaged me and was like, hey, we might actually have something opening up soon. So and then a few months later, I had the interviews and, went really well. But yeah, I guess that, like, I've always been a massive fan of The Witcher, read all the books multiple times before I got here. Now I've probably read them all 30 plus times each.
Jesus.
Yes, and I can tell actually. Every single time I talk to you, man, I have exactly this impression. So, yeah.
But yeah, I that is it. Like, I think that, like, I could give a more interesting answer that I could be more proud of, but I think it literally was that I just constantly posted about, like, did you know this about The Witcher? Or I'm playing The Witcher 3 for the 500th time. And then we had a conversation and Martin Matilda actually interviewed me, and that was actually very funny because it was the most atypical interview of all time in that, we'll talk about backgrounds in a minute maybe, but like it was supposed to be about backgrounds and things like that. But instead we talked about one of the Witcher short stories for like an hour and a half. Nice. And beautiful. Just like, we're kind of like almost like reciting passages of it back and forth. And
this is the stuff that I love.
That's the best. That's the best. Yeah.
It was a lot of fun. Like, at the end of the interview, he was like, man, that was great. Like, I really enjoyed that. I was like, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I'm happy you said this, Patrick, because I remember back in the day, like whenever I wanted some like specific things when it comes to The Witcher history or parts of the book, I would probably go to Blacha. And Blacha would tell me like in 12 something, this and this happened. I'm like, how the hell do you know this? And of course, like he's a narrative person. So he's doing multiple other things, right? But it's good to have a contact point that will give you all the like lore tidbits that you need. Like we work in communication. I worked previously in community. You need those things to make things believable, to actually recite things which are there and have happened. So kind of say like, okay, we're sticking to the lore. We're sticking to what the franchise has already built, the universe. So we're true to it and we're building on it. We're not changing it. We're like, we know our source stuff. So this was really cool to have this. And this was always like in the core DNA of the company.
And currently I'm not even able to imagine like Red without lore team, honestly. So it was great idea. And it's so helpful, man. It's so helpful. It's great to have you guys here. Let's talk about your backgrounds, guys, because that's super interesting. How to become even a lore master.
Especially that both of your backgrounds are totally different.
Totally different.
Like you are hired from pretty much like just loving the thing and reading the books and posting a lot of content about it. And you're previously a quest designer, but also very knowledgeable when it comes to the source text. So whichever wants to start.
I can go first. So at least for me, I've been working in the industry now as a narrative designer, quest designer, general designer, for a very long time. I previously worked at Obsidian Entertainment, worked on Neverwinter Nights 2 and Alpha Protocol, which is great. Great. I'm just going to go every camera. It's great.
All the cameras.
Should get it. It's on GOG now. I should go get it. When I got hired here, I came here in 2013, and I came specifically to work on Cyberpunk. It was right after the release of that Bullets trailer, and I was looking for a job at the time, and so I was like, okay, I'm applying, and came here to work on Cyberpunk. I had previously been a fan of the TTRPG. When I was much younger, I wasn't actually like a huge expert on the thing, but I knew it decently well. Started that, wound up working on Witcher 3 instead of Cyberpunk. Came back to Cyberpunk, but the fact that I knew the source material and wanted and had a pretty good relationship with Mike Pondsmith, the fact that I really wanted the 2077 to not be slavishly detailed or not slavishly dedicated to the source material, because we do have a different tone than that. But I wanted to be able to adapt it to do the thing that we wanted, but still have it be respecting the original materials and the stuff that Mike had done. And that wasn't necessarily always the case before I would get involved with things. And I'm not saying that anyone was doing anything wrong, but there's just, how game development works, particularly when you're not approaching that sort of thing in a structured manner. Everybody wants to do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And some amount of structure and some amount of attention to those details is important. So I started doing more of that, more and more of that, less and less of quest. And then, I already said the other bit, so you can go now.
I mean, I think the three of us have like radically different backgrounds, which I think is very conducive to the idea of our team because, or our team's success, I should say, because we have to cover like, subject matter that is extremely broad and often in a very kind of time efficient manner. And because of that, it's good to like, be able to like rely on each other's like own kind of personal suites of knowledge. Like, as you said, like Patrick has been in game design for many years and like, is like development experience that neither myself nor Marcin actually have. Marcin has more of a history background. It actually scares me sometimes how much he knows about history.
Very knowledgeable.
I did English in college, so I have a literature degree, and then I did journalism for a few years, primarily reporting, like interviewing people and telling stories, and then also game consulting, where I went into games and kind of used my experience as a critic to like inform like certain decisions as to how to improve it while it was still in development. So I think we all have very different backgrounds, but because of that as well, like I think sometimes the conversations we can have are very funny. Like we'll be on a meeting and you'll pull out probably the most obscure book I've ever seen in my life. Whereas Marcin, like, a while ago was sending me like all these images of like various cave paintings. Like we were having what I thought was a very casual like debate. I don't even want to say argument. And the stuff that he can pull out just at will is crazy.
It's crazy.
And then, like I think even recently I was annoying someone in work because we were talking about something and I started like sending them excerpts of like, because I did literature, romantic poetry from the late 18th century, and they just replied, "I'll read this tomorrow because this is the end of the day. Why are you sending this to me?" But that variety of backgrounds kind of allows us to do our job much more effectively. And I think it's difficult to say, like, what the background of a person who aspires to, like, do this job ought to look like, because I think maybe the more kind of varied it is might actually help, because then, again, they can kind of plug a lot of gaps then and like, be able to help their team when they need it.
Yeah.
But for me anyway, I think that like, that is something that's very unique and cool about our team as well.
I actually think that broad knowledge base is something that I recommend for really anyone who wants to work in games.
That's true.
I very often, you have people who want to work in games, and the thing that they know and the thing that they need to know is games, which is great because you need to know games, but you need to know more than that, a broad-based background, and it doesn't mean that everybody needs to know everything there is to know about movies or English literature or archaeology or philosophy or any of those things, but you should know some of them, and having a really broad knowledge base and being able to pull into those things and at least know that the knowledge is out there so that you can find it and pull on it when you need it. You know how to do research is very important for this job specifically. And that's not something that you can learn just from knowing, like, if you want to be like a lore master, it's not just about reading the source material and like memorizing it, because it's not about memorization. It's about adaptation. It's about taking the thing and making sure that it works for the thing that you need to do. And so having that broad knowledge base is really important.
But Cian, how did you get into it? Like, you're a dude from Ireland, right? So I would normally see like all the like Witcher fans are like Slavic dudes, probably Polish, I would say. Now it's more global because of like the books are available almost everywhere. They're translated into multiple languages. Plus, we have the movies, we have the games, we have everything that is kind of surrounding the whole thing. So how did you get into it? Because I want a little bit of like more of your background.
Yeah, it's actually quite funny because I can remember exactly what happened, which was I think I was like maybe 15 or 16 at the time, and I went for a coffee with one of my friends. And afterwards we went into GameStop and I had a bunch of games that I wanted to trade in, like, probably for, not very much money each, but because I had a good few of them, I was able to, like, accrue a decent amount of store credit. Mm-hmm. And I was looking through secondhand games, and I think I wanted to get the new Call of Duty, but didn't have enough money for it. And I saw this game called The Witcher 2, and I liked the cover, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like, and honestly, I went home that day, I started playing Witcher 2, I think it was on my Xbox 360, and I was terrible at it. And after like 2 hours, I said, I'm never playing this game again. And I turned it off, and I was like, no.
The beginning of that game is really hard.
Yeah.
I couldn't actually get past the tutorial. I wasn't used to playing RPGs at the time, outside of like maybe Nintendo games, like Pokemon and stuff. Mm-hmm. And because of that, I didn't play for a long time, and then I think one day I was supposed to go football training, and it was like, I still remember this vividly. it was raining, so it was called off, and I was like, oh, I'm really bored. What will I do? I guess I'll try this game I got again. And I played it for like 12 hours straight or something, like through the night, and I had to go into school the following morning and was absolutely exhausted. But after that, like, just devoured the game, like, went through it a couple of times, learned that there were some books, but not all of the books had been translated into English at this point. I played it secondhand, so probably you're talking 2012, 2013. So I read whatever I could get my hands on, and then Witcher 3 came out in 2015. After that, I think I was just enamored. Like, I could not, I couldn't actually stop then. So I read all the other books and then played Witcher 3 a million times, like, Thronebreaker, everything. And, I like fantasy in general, specifically fantasy books, but nothing has really clicked with me as much as Witcher did, aside from maybe Lord of the Rings, which...
Yeah, I want to say that.
Yeah, and I think, like, it's something that I have to, like, kind of reconcile now at the moment, because I don't know. Like, I say I prefer The Witcher, it's my favorite, but then because of nostalgia and stuff as well, I think I'm very attached to The Lord of the Rings. But yeah, I think that was it. Like, it's just funny that at the start I was like, I'm never going to play this again because it was too hard for me. And then, life went very differently then.
He met the hobbits.
Yeah. I saw I think there was a photo on Twitter, right?
Yeah,
for
a couple of years ago.
For sure. Yeah, but I feel like, if you're a fan of Tolkien, you're a fan of Sapkowski. I feel like it always goes that way.
There's a third name right now, in my opinion, that is in the row, is Joe Abercrombie.
Oh.
I don't know if you're familiar with it. I totally recommend it.
Yeah.
I'll check it out.
Yeah, it's amazing. First Law.
Okay.
I love this saga. I believe that even Andrzej Sapkowski, he said that currently Joe writes the best dialogues and fantasy books.
Have you seen Sapkowski's list of like 50?
Yeah, he has. It's his canon. He's expanded it recently.
Oh, really? I need to see the updates because he's got great taste.
But is it translated? There's a book called a journal left in the Dragon's Cave.
It's not translated. Like no,
it's not,
no.
Like this book, like I was like impressed by how blunt he was at the very beginning. So it starts like do you think about yourself that you know what the fantasy really is? Okay. Yeah. Did you read all these 100 books? No? You don't know. So it's kind of...
There's some real good stuff on there. Some real good stuff. Also, a lot of stuff I haven't read.
Yeah. But that's a really cool thing that you've mentioned also, Patrick, about that the franchise, the lore master, is not about memorizing stuff, but is about actually everything other. Like, how deeply you make a research, how you add things to each other, how do you kind of synthesize the knowledge and pass it through. And so can we talk a bit about what makes a franchise, a lore master team, being successful when it comes to the lore building, world building, and story in general?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I tell Marcin and Keen is that I feel like rather than, we talk about lore master, right? But we shouldn't approach that job as historians or as journalists. Those are useful skills to have. But really what we are is we're the guardians of the vibe. We want to make sure that Keen's laughing.
It's a cool title.
It's a vibe. It's a cool title. It's like unfortunately it's unfortunately kind of vague, but I think it points in the direction of what our job really is, which is like at the end of the day, is this Cyberpunk? Is this Witcher? Right? And that's the question that you're answering. And sometimes you can answer that question by saying, well, on page 37 of this book, it says this. Sometimes the answer is yes, even though on page 37 it says the opposite, right? Because sometimes there are things where, you may be contradicting the source material, but actually this is the way to do it, right? This is the way to tell this story. And it's really about figuring out how to maintain that feeling, how to make sure that it feels like The Witcher or it feels like Cyberpunk or whatever IP that you're approaching this. And of course, I have these words like IP and franchise, and they sound so corporate, and they are. Like that is the job, right? But at the same time, it's really about the artistic integrity of that thing that you're trying to do, and that's what you're trying to preserve that quality. And sometimes you preserve it to better quality or lesser quality. And sometimes you do have to make compromises. But It's always about making sure that those compromises are the best version of that compromise that you have to make, because we do have constraints. I think about this thing. I saw this clip of George Lucas in the 80s talking, and he's talking about the difference between American cinema and Soviet cinema. And he says that and I don't know if this is accurate to what he was saying, but he was saying that he's going on about Americans are always talking about Soviet cinema being really repressive and like the censorship is very, very. And he said, but in his experience talking to Soviet directors, he didn't feel that was the case. They have certain set of rules. Don't criticize the government. And you can do anything else you want. He says he feels like he has way more restrictions because he has to make something that people want to watch, right? And he has to make something that's going to make money. And the compromises that you make towards those goals are even stronger than the ones that the Soviet cinema was having to do. I don't know if that's accurate, but definitely when he said that, I felt that, right? Like, oh yeah, of course, because at the end of the day, that is what we do. Is we it's a business, it's a corporation, but we want to try to make sure that the artistic quality is preserved, right? And that we're telling the stories that we want to tell in the universes that people have come to expect, but also, surprise them sometimes. And it's not just about, the book says this. So yeah, but of course, obviously, sometimes the book does say that. So.
Yeah.
Actually, talking about cinema, I remember recently, I believe, months ago, I've read the interview with Denis Villeneuve, I think, regarding Dune, and actually they had a pretty cool rule that whenever they felt that they actually were getting lost, they had the rule to get back to the source material and to reread Frank Herbert's thingy. And I think this is awesome. This is something that I praise and I love, that actually you guys are this kind of a guardians, but with your guarding, I would say that there come constraints. And I am really, personally, I am grateful for these constraints, because there is no good design without constraints. You know what I mean? And sometimes when we're looking for solutions and we actually sometimes forget about the limits, or actually I'm getting lost sometimes. So it's just checking with you guys. It's very helpful to make people feel even secure that, oh yeah, this is in canon. This is actually following some strict rules. This is super helpful.
Yeah, it's also about, not getting overburdened by so many things that are coming to you from different directions. And sometimes, as you guys all know, the creative process is crazy. There's multiple ideas. We want to always one-up ourselves and do things better, bigger, bolder. But, there should be some limitations. But do you also feel that sometimes this kind of limits how crazy you can go with some of the things? Can this have a negative effect? Or is it more like, okay, this is good that this is actually here?
It goes both ways, because there are definitely times where somebody has an idea and you're like, that's a really cool idea. But if we're doing our jobs correctly, and I think we can think of examples, but if we're doing our jobs correctly, when people bring us that crazy idea, what we really want to try to do is not say no, but say, what about you do it like this? We try to be solution oriented rather than I do not want our team to be the team that is in the job of saying no. We're in the job of saying yes and
which is guiding more than reviewing.
Exactly, right? Exactly.
Yeah,
And we don't have final approval over the game development. When it comes to licensing and franchising and working with partners, we do. But when it comes to the internal game development, we don't have final approval. Instead, we work as consultants. But I don't think we've ever had a situation where that's actually been a problem. I think our feedback is always accepted in good faith and incorporated in great ways. So, seems to be working so far. So
in one of the episodes, we had the BizDev guys, like we had
Janek
and Stibor, and they were talking about, sometimes we will not take a deal if it doesn't go hand in hand with what our franchise is like wanting and the direction we want to go. Because if something just feels off and is not genuine, but it's like you said, it's a vibe in a sense, but it's also like a gut feel. And it's very, I feel like it's walking like a very thin, fine line, because if you're a fan of things like me, for example, I love Star Wars, I love Marvel, like DC Comics and stuff like that. And there's the things that sometimes you feel like someone is taking a different take. Yeah. It's like, it fits, but sometimes you see things and they're like, does this really fit? Or you need kind of convincing. And it's very hard to walk the line.
And to balance it, right? Yeah. Because there's always this kind of fight between, pushing things creatively, making them strictly canon-oriented, versus constraints versus freedom. Finding this balance, that's super, super tough sometimes.
But I like the part about expanding things. I really like when I read or watch or see something that is different than what I would consider, let's say, the norm, and then it kind of deviates to a different direction. You're like, wow, this is really cool.
Like talking about Star Wars, Andor was a great example.
Totally,
That was it, right? High story in this world.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, that is part of what we do. Like, I can't talk too much about the specific projects that we're working on, but this is another role of our team, is also to help grow the franchise and expand them and do world building and expand the things that we're actually, the parts of our settings that we want to develop. And like I said, I can't talk about specific projects right now, but that is something that Marcin and Cian on the Witcher side and myself on the Cyberpunk side have been working on, is actually finding ways to grow the franchise and to adapt the franchise to new parts of the setting and things like that.
Yeah, it's crazy how it has grown. Like we've expanded to doing comic books, like action figures. We have our characters from The Witcher even be part of stuff like Fortnite, which for some people in the beginning were like, does that fit? But it actually kind of does, and it looks cool. So
I'm a little outspoken on the Fortnite thing because not everybody likes it, but I actually think it's kind of cool. The way that I see something like Fortnite is I see this is the younger generation's toy box. Right?
Exactly.
And when I was a kid, I had action figures and I would play with action figures. Kids don't play with action figures anymore. Adults play with action figures, which I don't entirely get.
No, we collect them.
Yeah, collect them. Don't take them out of the package.
This is what I say.
It ruins their value.
Yeah.
Not for me, but sure.
They inspire us, and we need it for work. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's true.
But but the younger kids, they play Fortnite. They play video games, and they have their little toys in that space. So having our characters show up in that, like, I actually think that's a partnership that works. And I just have to say, also working with them, they've got it down. Like, they know what they're doing.
I love it, to be honest.
They're really good partners. Epic, really good partners. The Fortnite team, very good. Very good.
And actually, I love the idea. And of course, it was a tough nut to crack at the beginning because you have extremely two different IPs, two different identities, right? Fun, fast-paced versus grounded, dark. But then you have a Geralt and his floating roach in the sky, and you have and
it's fun.
That's it.
It's fun. Yeah,
you love it.
And something like that also allows us to explore the more whimsical side of things. God, this sounds like I'm advertising for Fortnite right now. I'm really not, but
I love the game, by the way.
I haven't actually played it. I've watched people playing it.
I play with my son.
When we get partnerships, I almost never actually play them. I watch other people play them because it's less about am I into this partnership? It's who is into this kind of game. And so I like to watch other people for further research and,
also
of course.
genuine reaction from them. Like,
or something like akin to a genuine reaction, close to a genuine reaction, genuine with a little bit of whipped cream on top. But yeah, and that's helpful because whenever you're approaching one of those partnerships, you want to try to find the place where your audiences overlap, who plays this game and then who plays our game and what's the intersection of those two things. And sometimes you look at a partnership and that Venn diagram has almost no overlap or no discernible overlap. And sometimes you have to walk away from those. Sometimes you say I'm sorry, I just don't think that this makes sense. But when there is overlap, that's where you want to focus it and try to make something that's fun for everybody. And I think with like the Fortnite one with like the little bit sillier version of Geralt and all of that, I think that's, you know, it was really fun to work on. So
yeah, I remember like we always had also when we were doing like, let's say things which were more cartoony when it comes to like showcasing Geralt and stuff like that, there are limitations of where we can take certain characters and what's okay and what's like totally not okay. So for example, looking into Geralt as a character, what would you say is like one thing that totally cannot happen? Like, what are the like...
This is a question for Keen.
What can you not do?
I mean, especially as part
of... You can't be smiling.
Especially as part of CDPR's Geralt, I think like there are certain... Like, for example, if we were to talk about his visual design, there are certain staples of what constitutes not just a Witcher, but like Geralt. Like, you know, the two swords, the yellow feline eyes for Geralt, you have the white hair, like, you know, the wolf medallion, all of this kind of like iconography that contributes to the overall whole. And in all of the partnerships, that's always transferred. Mm-hmm. These are immutable, I think. Like, you can't mess with his eyes, you can't mess with the medallion or anything like that because it needs to be Geralt at a glance. Mm-hmm. But also what I wanted to... Just to pull it back a minute ago to a previous question when, like, you know, you were talking about like Marvel and DC and things like that and how sometimes people try to do things, they might work really well, they might not work. And also to relate that back to what you were saying about the job as being Guardians of the Vibe, which the first time I heard that, I couldn't stop laughing because I heard Guardians of the, and Vibe was not the word I was expecting, but then I was like, it makes so much sense. But like The Witcher Ronin is a phenomenal example of something that works really well, despite the fact that it is very, very different from like, you know, Sapkowski's Witcher and CDPR's Witcher, but at the same time, like, you know, the Ronin is somewhat analogous as an archetype to a Witcher, like, you know, this lone swordsman, like, you know, roaming the wilderness, wandering the path, as we would call it. But with all of these different things, because of that, like it gives this room for a lot of like creative experimentation and to like play around with things. And then of course there are still constraints, and that refers back to what you were saying there. Like, you know, there are certain things that Geralt needs. Mm-hmm. Like usually on top of those visual aspects, like, you know, it depends on which version of Geralt we're discussing. If we're talking about Geralt from the short stories, who's much younger than CDPR's Geralt, and also probably my favorite version of Geralt, he's not as stoic. Like, you know, he doesn't speak in those like truncated, punchy sentences. He complains a lot.
Yeah,
like, and he really laments his lot in life. Like, one of my favorite sections from the short stories, or what I believe is one of the funniest, is in A Shard of Ice. Geralt learns that Yennefer is sleeping with another man. Mm-hmm. And because of this, he doesn't like confront her. He's actually very childish about the whole thing. And he starts feeling sorry for himself. So he's walking around and he's like, and this town is terrible. And I went to this bar and it was terrible. And they asked me, did I want something? Or they didn't ask me and I didn't want it anyway, but I'm really annoyed that they didn't ask me in the first place. And it's so funny because like when we compare that to even, you know, Witcher 1 or 2 Geralt, I think Witcher 3 is now like, you know, that kind of archetypical Geralt that like, you know, stoicism is like a key part of his character now. But even that, there's variance depending on what era of his life we're examining. And then obviously like, you know, the saga is that kind of like transitionary period between those two things where like, you know, after sort of finally taking Ciri on as his ward and like, you know, he starts to kind of, you see in real time that he complains a lot in the saga, actually, to be honest. But towards the end, like, you know, he's becoming more stoic. He questions his identity as a Witcher and, you know. But yeah, I think the Ronin one was a fantastic example of how, like, you can, by maintaining these, like, certain key aspects of what differentiates Geralt from other fantasy protagonists, you can then just have him inhabit a completely different setting and have it feel natural and organic, despite the fact it's different, because it adheres to that same overall vibe. And, you know, so for me, like, you know, I think Ronin is sick. Like, I think it's so, so cool.
Yeah.
It just looks also really cool. I remember we had in the studios, there was this one event where I think board members, they got T-shirts, like white T-shirts with just Geralt as Ronin. Everybody wanted that freaking T-shirt. Everybody wanted that thing because it was just, it looked so cool. And the vibe was there. You're like, yeah, this could work. I know it's different totally than what we're used to, but it works.
And I think there is a funny story behind this. I think Robert Adler drew this concept, and it took like one day because it was ordered like, we need something fast for, I think, Novak to get the prize for something in Japan or whatever. Like, and yeah, and this is what happened. And
they put it on T-shirts.
That's a funny thing because Robert Adler is all about like he he could be a part of a lore master team at some point when it comes to the Witcher franchise. This guy is crazy. He's so opinionated about anything we do.
Yes, he is.
And he has strong opinions. But yeah, I love this concept. It's amazing.
Well, if he wants to transfer to the franchise art team, I actually don't know if there are any openings. It's not my team, sister team, but you know,
yeah, or all part of the family.
Yeah.
What about Cyberpunk? Since we're seeing, like you said, we're seeing transition from 2020 to 2077. So that was a lot of like
two corporate wars.
Yeah, that was a lot of just like what can we do? But it still feels like that's what, at least what I've seen. I'm not a big fan of the TTRPG because I wasn't exposed to it, but I saw people who were. They were like, this is Cyberpunk. Mm-hmm. It's in the future, but it totally works. So how was that process?
The way that I wanted to approach the world building on 2077, so a little bit of backstage stuff that I don't know if we've ever actually talked about, but I think it's okay to talk about, is that 2077 was not originally going to be a continuation of 2020. It was originally going to be a reboot of 2020. And because of that, like you can probably, if you do some archaeology on 2077, you can see little vestiges of it. That originally this was actually a reboot and these characters were not, these characters were, it's why some of the characters may sometimes feel a little out of time. But originally we were doing that. We met with Mike Pondsmith. We presented it to him. He wasn't a fan. And so the job was given by Adam Badovsky, was given to me and Alex Boret, who was a quest designer here at the time. Works at 11-bit now, doing a great job. Pick up Frostpunk 2 when it comes out. And so we had the job of sort of like taking what we had already done and working backwards to make it a continuation. And so what we really thought about is I thought about the Ouroboros, right? Mm-hmm. The snake, it's eating its own tail. And so the idea is that you had a state of the world in 2020 presented by the TTRPGs. It collapses at the end of the Fourth Corporate War, which is the last books they published in the 2020 line. Then they did Cyber Generation and Cyberpunk version 3. We decided those were not canon. We agreed with Mike that they wouldn't be part of the continuity. I don't like the word canon. We can talk about that some other time. But they wouldn't be part of the continuity. And instead, we got some notes from Mike about what he wanted to do in sort of like the 2040s era. Because he has Cyberpunk Red, which is sort of the bridges the gap between 2020 and 2077. There would be this period, and then it would come back. And so 2077 is when Night City is almost back to the position it was in 2020. So the thing that I was always trying to do was to take ideas from 2020, adapt the tone, adapt some of the themes, remove some of the campier elements that we weren't comfortable using, but to still try to keep that same energy, that same vibe, and bring things back to 2020 in 2077, so that Arasaka is here, Militic is here, all the key players are here. We see the world, we recognize it. So if you were a fan of 2020, or you had become a fan of 2020 in the lead up to 2077, you'd be able to recognize Night City as this place, right? This place that you adventured in the TTRPG or that you read about in the books. It was a recognizable thing with CDPR's spin on it. The same way we took Geralt from Sapkowski and adapted him and made a CDPR version of that character that now has become very iconic. Who is in some ways a different character, but in some ways the same character, right?
Yep.
And so Night City was really Night City for 2020 and 2077. That was our Geralt. Right? Like that was the character that we were trying to adapt more than Johnny and Rogue and Carrie and all of those characters. Those characters were actually not that difficult to adapt because there's actually not a lot about them in the 2020 materials. We met with Mike Pondsmith and got some, background information on them, like Carrie had been married and background information, stuff that's not necessarily in the books. So that we got those characters right, because a lot of those characters are actually, characters from Mike Pondsmith's games of 2020. So we want to do honor to that and respect those. But yeah, so that was the goal, was to try to just bring things full circle and try to represent that thing. And now that we've done that, maybe we can look at doing things differently, move things in different directions, change things up a little bit. Of course, that's a ways off. We'll have more to say later, but try to keep things moving, try to keep things lively. For something like Cyberpunk, we don't want that to be a static IP where you're just always coming back and you're experiencing the exact same thing. It's the exact state of the world again. So anyway, the thing was it was a reboot that also needed to have continuity, and so we looped it around, and I think we were pretty successful with it. There are things about it that I would do differently now, but
of course,
I think we did a pretty good job. So
yeah. And then Phantom Liberty and adding a little bit of spy and espionage.
Yeah, that was great.
So good.
It
fits so well into the whole thing.
Yeah.
I
actually think that's one of the things that's very strong about the Cyberpunk franchise is its versatility in telling different kinds of genre stories.
Yeah.
It's when it comes to The Witcher, it's the characters that are the most important. The setting is important, but it's the characters that are the most important. It's the characters that Sapkowski wrote down and their dynamics, right? And the world, like I say, the world is important, but it's really a lot about how do characters in this world think, how do they behave, how do they whatever. And you can talk more about it. But for Cyberpunk, it's the setting that's the main character. And you can tell lots of kinds of stories. You can nest lots of different. You want to tell a Western? You can tell a Western. You want to tell a sci-fi story? You can tell a sci-fi story. You want to tell a spy story? You can tell a spy story. Crime story. No problem.
Anything, yeah.
Go down the list.
Yeah.
Go down the list of all these different genres, and every one that comes to this world of Cyberpunk, is going to take on certain qualities of it. And there are certain parts of it that. So one of the very first things that our team did was they actually put together a franchise guide for Cyberpunk, the Cyberpunk core DNA. Sorry, it's not public. It's only for our partners and for internal use. But, one of the sections in that is talking about genres. And these are the genres we used to construct 2077, those genres being noir, thriller, Western, sci-fi. Those genres, you can see those in 2077, but even in that section, it says other genres are explorable here. And in fact, now after Phantom Liberty, I need to go probably update it and add spy genre in there as well. Yeah. It's due for an update, so I'll put that. I'll get Luigi to schedule something for me.
Luigi's our producer.
Luigi's our producer. Yeah.
He's listening.
Fantastic producer.
That's
fantastic
true,
producer.
True,
one of our best.
So how does your day-to-day look like, since you work with lore franchise? So you would think that also stuff that kind of pivots away from the games themselves, but also stuff that is connected to our titles. How do you work with developers? Is it in a way that you come in and, let's say, critique the narrative, or you have quest designers coming to you saying, I want to do this quest, do you think it will fit the overall theme? What's the process for you guys?
I don't think I have a fixed day today.
Yeah.
I think that it's even I've been here a little over a year, and the job has evolved a lot since I started, but also it's kind of, I've set it to keep a list of my tasks, because there is not that there's no kind of continuity, but I mean, we do so many different things and they change so frequently that it's easier to kind of organize it in such a way as that you recognize what's a short deadline versus what's a long deadline. But I haven't had the same week or day twice in 16 months.
But you probably always start from, let's say, sending to partner a guidelines, a Bible, a rule set, right? That's your probably starting point for all the processes, right?
Well, usually that's actually handled by either our brand team or our various producers, biz dev. They know to send that material out to our partners. Partners get that information. We also have this thing called the data term. The data term in the Witcher library, one for Cyberpunk, one for the Witcher. And those contain within them some information, like we have an art Bible and we have the core DNA, and you can get the comics and and things like that. You can get all of that stuff from our data term. We'll sometimes share that with our partners as well, depending on what it is. But to Cian's point, like, huge amounts of what we do is reactive. I say that there's probably 40% of the work that I do is stuff that's actually, I know that I have to work on. And then the rest of it is stuff that people just bring to us during the day. Projects that I've never heard of just show up suddenly and like, can you consult on this? But like, in a week, I might be looking at comic book pages or scripts for various things. Briefs from the game team, give your feedback on this, read through it, look at the comic book panels, make sure there's nothing in the comic book that's wrong. And like, I got something the other day where it was a comic book and the sketches had been done. And I was just like, that's not a Cyberpunk fire extinguisher. Here's reference for what fire extinguishers look like in Cyberpunk. We also work closely with the franchise art team that does the same thing on an art level, and with our brand teams also handling things. And of course, BizDev brings us partnerships from the outside. But then when it comes to the dev teams, we work and we're sometimes embedded in the dev teams. I work very closely with the Orion team preparing world building briefs. You do the same for you, and Marcin do the same for our Witcher developments as well. So
that's awesome. But guys, you talk about all this stuff and it seems that it's super easy, simple, and you love it. And but there are for sure some challenges that you face, right? On at least weekly basis, or it's so smooth. How does it work for you guys?
I wouldn't say it's smooth, but I think that, a lot of our job is to be able to, as Patrick said, it's reactive. So I think that challenges are just a normal part of the job. A lot of the time when we're brought in, it's because maybe some challenge has been identified in the first place. So we're often kind of consulted to try and rectify that. Like Patrick said earlier on, that with our team, the last thing we would ever want to do is say no to people. So that's always a challenge as well, is because it's figuring out the best way to say yes, with maybe some minor adjustments. I know Patrick has said this before. I once heard it from a guy who works at Bethesda, and it was this idea that a lot of people kind of expect that if they come to you and ask something, that you're going to take out a old copy of The Witcher and smack them on the hand and say no, that's not allowed. But it's not. That's the thing, is I don't think there's any single memorable challenge that I can recall, so much as that it is kind of when we are talk to people in the first place, it can be challenging, and it demands a lot of critical thinking to be able to engage with different things and identify what's the core of this idea, how do we maintain the creative intent while also slightly repurposing maybe some minor elements of it such that it then adheres to the vibe that we want to strike. So that is inherently challenging.
Yeah,
I think.
it is. But I love the approach. It's amazing.
Yeah, and it's fun. That's why it's interesting. It's kind of it kind of demands kind of some creativity on our end as well to be able to kind of think about these solutions. So, although, yeah, I'd say that is the kind of idea, is that it's it's always challenging.
Yeah, it's always challenging. And I think, one of the other things is if so much of your work is reactive, it also does get really hard to manage your schedule, because you'll have these things that you need to deliver this week, and you need to work on them. But then you have somebody saying, can you look at this? 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 And at least for me, I don't know about you, but at least for me, if somebody comes to me and says, can you look at this? I know that if I don't look at that right now, it's going to get less and less likely every minute that passes that I'm going to go back and look at that. So I want to look at it now, and I want to give them an answer now. And I know that people appreciate how quickly I get back to them on things, but I also know that other people are sometimes frustrated because the thing that is going to take me several weeks to do, or the thing that I've said it'll take a week actually winds up taking 2 weeks, because I spent all of that time giving other people the immediate answers, immediately reacting to things. So Yeah, so that can be a big challenge.
I think that's somewhat compounded by the way as well, is that like even internally we have people all over the world, and then when we bring partners into it, like, you know, we're covering so many different time zones that, like, you know, when you start in the morning, like when I finish for the day, I'll be like, right, I'll get to this first thing tomorrow morning, and then you start and something's come in from a different time zone, like, oh, I'll get to this right away.
Yeah.
And then things just slip through the cracks then, which again is why I've started keeping a list.
Yeah.
It's very old school, but it's
You may be more organized than I am at this point. That's absolutely the case. I mean, you know, when it comes to finish at the end of the day, and then I come back and I've got stuff from the Boston time zone, I've got stuff from Japan, I've, you know, and on top of that, you know, everything that's happening in Warsaw. So it can be crazy.
It can be a lot. Guys, you've mentioned about Mike Pondsmith.
Yes.
And also there is Andrzej Sapkowski, of course, we've mentioned too. We have relationship with guys. And I remember Mike being super responsive when it comes to, like, I know that you have some relationship to, like, we as a company. He was visiting the headquarters multiple times. Same with Andrzej. And do you still have some contact with them? I know that Andrzej is a bit less responsive, but I know that he also answers some of our questions and challenges. But can you tell more about the relationship with, let's say, Mike?
Sure. I mean, I think I have a pretty good relationship with Mike. I love working with Mike. Mike is a super, super smart dude. And those original 2020 stuff, like there's a real spark of genius in there. And so I really enjoy working with Mike. And I've been working with him for years now. One of the things that we've done, and I did this before taking this job, but then after taking this job, this sort of became one of my main responsibilities, is working with his company, Artel Sorian, on making sure that we're collaborating on their developments in Cyberpunk Red, and then our stuff on 2077. And then more recently, we did a joint project with them, the Edge Runners TTRPG boxed set. And I'm really proud of our work on that. I think we worked more closely on that than we've worked on anything in the past. And there were some moments where it was a little bit difficult figuring out what that process was actually going to look like. Because generally speaking, when I get stuff for Cyberpunk Red is their brand and their version of Cyberpunk. We make sure that we're agreeing on basic direction and basic things, but, you know, I don't have any editorial oversight on how it goes and so forth. And so for Edge Runners, because Edge Runners is our brand, our part of the brand, there needed to be a little bit more back and forth, a lot more collaboration on how that would actually go. But I think that we actually worked it out, and in the end, it worked really well. And I'm looking forward to doing more with them in that area. But I don't want to spoil anything.
That's really cool.
But yeah,
I didn't know about that, to be honest. That's super cool to hear.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah.
Actually, I think Mike, I just got a notice. I didn't talk to Mike about this directly, but I saw Mike is going to be visiting our studio up in Vancouver, and actually running TTRPG for some of the guys up there, which is very, very cool. I'm actually jealous.
Item.
I've never played in a game that Mike GM'd. I'm actually pretty jealous.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Maybe next time I'm in Boston, I'll see if he can come out and do that. That would be great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, I remember when Andrzej Sapkowski came to the studio. Like it wasn't that long ago, and I remember like meeting him for the first time. It was it's incredible. Like they say, you know, I grew up on the books, so for me, like meeting him in person was just like surreal. And
that was awesome.
It's incredible, and I liked his like charisma. He was like super open, like no, yes. Yeah, you can do this. He's like, oh, you know, how did you do this? Well, you know, I'm just a genius.
Yeah.
Easy. And I love that. Totally.
The Claude is a king.
Yeah.
He seems fun.
Yeah.
Claude is a king.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the time. Right.
Yeah.
And I remember warm up for this meeting. It was for half an hour. He started up because it was like this kind of a dead silence, and everyone was like, you know, and
can we talk?
Like, let's talk about politics, right? I've read in the newspaper today and that was a good, a small talk, you know, that we started
instantly clicked. But it's incredible because if you think about like Mike and then Andrzej, they created like something that we love, and like you guys, especially, like you're very into the source material, you know it super well. So for you, it's just like, it's like, and you get and you meet the person behind it, and just like, wow, that's like, you don't always get that opportunity, right? So having that is just incredible, and it's like, this is really cool, but also must be difficult, because then you have to, like, you know, work on it, and as you previously mentioned, like, we expand the universes, so we're adding, let's say, bricks on top of a foundation which has already been built, but it must be like, you're always kind of thinking like, you know, is it a little bit of imposter syndrome or not?
I don't feel imposter syndrome.
Good.
I think I'm great. I'm pretty great. I'm awesome.
You are. I agree.
That's true.
It was actually supposed to be a joke, and you guys were supposed to laugh. But in any case,
no, because it's not a joke, because it's true.
We know you though.
Yeah. No, I've been accused of being arrogant before by people who don't like me. But no, I mean, I would love to work on something that I own. And I think that every creative feels that way, right? But we work in AAA, and that's just not how the industry works. That's just not how things work. And being able to work on something like Cyberpunk or like Witcher, that's an honor, right? Like these are great IPs. These are great settings. These are great things that people have come and they've worked on before. And so you are following in the footsteps of incredible creators. And so really, I'm very, very grateful to be able to work on something like Cyberpunk. It's just fantastic.
Same here.
What about Witcher for you?
The exact same, but I mean, almost like, it's strange because even now, like after being here for nearly a year and a half, like it doesn't feel real a lot of the time that I get to, like, you know, especially because it's such a, like, you know, a job that necessitates getting into like the nitty gritty all of the time. I'm like, this is wild. Like, you know, I'm getting to talk about like all of these incredibly granular details in The Witcher, and that is my job. Like Patrick said, it is an honor. Like, I feel extremely lucky. And, you know, I've yet to like wake up any day since I started here and be like, oh, I work today. Like, it just hasn't happened, because like there's always, like, you know, things that we're working on that like are so interesting and, you know, exciting. And because of that, like, you know, yeah, I think honor was probably the best word.
Yeah.
And also, well, I was going to say, there's also always the opportunity to, with this stuff, is to also do it the way that you want to do it. You know, when I come at Cyberpunk, you know, I used to play the TTRPG. And so I always had my own ideas about how Night City works or how this Cyberpunk world works. And the books didn't say, does it work this way or does it work that way? And so when we're doing the creation of this stuff, I can say, you know what? I actually have an idea that I had in a TTRPG game that I played, and I'm putting it in because I think it's cool. And then I can run it past Mike or Jay Gray, who's the guy at Artosorian who runs the Cyberpunk brand now. I can be like, how do you think? What do you think? Does this work? And, you know, and now it's part of the story, right? Like it's part of that story. So it feels really good.
Yeah, I think it's also incredible, like working with so many great minds. And it's something that I always appreciated, especially when I joined the company. I started learning a lot about how games are made and also who's responsible for what and how they operate. And you have these days where you come back home after a couple meetings or talks that you had, discussions with people, so energized and so full of like inspiration that it's like, wow, I'm super like happy to be here because I feel like I'm learning every day, which is incredible.
That's true. Yeah. Like every single day. I've just learned about TTRPG for Edge Runners. Like, dude,
I'll get you a copy. Yeah.
Thank you, man.
I need to order some for the office anyway.
That's awesome.
Now that it's actually out, I need to order some.
I came to Red because of Cyberpunk first.
Really?
Of course, I love Witcher, and like since I remember, but still, I was playing 7 years pen and papers, and what you said about classes, I also perceive it as one of the biggest strengths behind the first franchise, about like the Night City welcome everyone's, but has no mercy. Yeah. You know what I mean? And they love this concept, like Night City being an antagonist in this world, and I love it. So yeah,
I always loved like dystopian stuff. So this was like this was really cool. Like I haven't heard about Cyberpunk before, but when I joined the company, I remember like when we're still smaller, like one of the first meetings we had was with Adam Badowski, and Adam was like telling his vision for Cyberpunk, and he was like talking about like where the inspiration came from, and that he loved the pen and paper, and I was like, wow, this is something that I need to catch up on because it sounds just amazing. And then of course it is. Yeah.
No, yeah, it is. Okay, maybe let's talk about the future of Lore Team, because it just hit 2 years and there are more to come. And what's the idea behind like the evolution? Do you have a plan? Anything that you can share with, of course,
I don't know if I can share anything. We definitely do have plans. We're talking right now about setting up like a franchise writer's room. Steibor, you had him recently. This is sort of his initiative, is building this writer's room so we can have the comic book writers, the lore people all in sort of, in one group. We can collaborate on things together. I think that'll be really nice. Of course, continuing to develop our franchises and, talking about expanding the franchises that we have. Definitely can't talk about anything there. But we don't. When you see our games next and you see the things that we put out, games, comic books, etc., we want to make sure that we're always growing the IP. We're always growing the setting. So you're meeting new characters, seeing new places, doing new things. And our team is there helping put those things together and helping make sure that, like I said at the very beginning, that it's a structured approach. Mm-hmm. We want to collect everybody's feedback and everybody's input, and then try to finesse it, try to shape it into something really coherent and excellent, and do it up front rather than on the back end like we may have done it in the past. So, yeah.
Well said. Well said without spoiling anything.
Yeah, I have to be really careful about what I say.
Yeah, because I see you're tiptoeing around.
There are things that I'm very, very excited about that I would love to talk about.
Same.
But I really, really can't.
That's awesome.
Unfortunately.
That's enough. There are plans.
Yes,
for expanding. I like it. I love it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool.
All right.
I think we have it.
Yeah, I think we have it. Guys, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having us.
It was
Pleasure.
a really nice episode, especially it was 9th. After all the episodes we've had so far, Lore was a great dot.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for coming, guys.
Very nice. Yeah.
Cheers for having us.
Thank you. It was really nice. It was really nice being here.
Awesome.
All right, everyone. Thank you for watching, and we hope that you've enjoyed at least as much as we did. Right, Burza?
Yep, this was an incredible episode. I love talking about lore because it's the foundation of everything we do.
Absolutely. This is it.
And of course, as you saw in the previous episodes, we have some questions from you. And we have 3 for this one, starting with great video as always, guys. Love to hear your inside thoughts about many aspects of the industry and of what consists of making games. However, what microphones are you using in your videos because you're sounding great? So these are universal audio standard SD1 microphones. And we as you probably know and you heard in the previous episodes, we like to keep the quality of our content at a very, very high level. So the microphones, of course, also have to have a high quality. And we were talking about, working on the podcast in the beginning. The most important thing for us was to have good audio because a lot of you are just listening at home or on your drive, on your commute. So quality needs to be there. So thank you for this question. This was by @MRVVVV or quadruple V. Yeah. Second question by Valkyrian Dreams. Okay, I probably messed that up a little bit. So you guys, I also want to buy that merch that you have. Where can I purchase that? So the t-shirt that I'm wearing, you can go to our gear store. It's an official store where we have t-shirts, figures, accessories, whatever, you name it, connected to Cyberpunk, Witcher, so whatever you like. And that's where we get most of our stuff. I know your t-shirt is also from the store.
Actually,
or is it a different collaboration?
I think, no. Actually, that was also from the gear store, but as far as I know, was like 5 years ago, something like that, and I think it's not available.
Yeah, fun fact, when we look at our wardrobe, it's pretty much Witcher, Cyberpunk, it's all that jazz. Like,
and it's Jira.
Yeah, and when you want to put on a normal t-shirt, you normally don't have one. But we also get, of course, t-shirts which are connected to teams that we're working with. For example, I have multiple t-shirts that were connected to Gwent. I know there's also special t-shirts in between developers that are working on different projects. I know when you started working on the new Witcher saga, you had specific links t-shirts and stuff like that. So
we tend to create special, depends on occasions.
Yeah,
it's like a reward after, let's say, a particular stage of the production, for example. So we create t-shirts like that too.
There are a couple things which are very close. I have this Gwen jacket that was given to team members, which I totally love.
It's amazing.
So, there's a little bit of that, but what we try to showcase in these videos is actually the things which are available to you. So you can also get them at the gear store. So if you just Google gear CDPR, you'll have all that stuff. There was, as we previously said, there was a YouTube community that we started, and there was a question that we posted there about favorite tunes, and everybody sent in their favorite tunes when it comes to Cyberpunk and Witcher. Question is, what's your favorite tune that you like to, you can pretty much listen on playback?
I think it's going to be a boring answer. I love Never Fade Away.
Ooh.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
I love it.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah, I'm kind of more Witcher. It's just like Banana Tiger and all that stuff. I can listen to that to all the time, but also let's say early work from P.T. Adamczyk, Merchants of Ophir for Gwent is one of those that I have on playback, and it's on my playlist.
So from The Witcher, I love the very first one from the Hearts of Stone. Which is called Hearts of Stone.
Yes.
And I love this one.
Also the Master Mirror theme.
Oh, yeah, it's also great. Yeah.
But I also remember, I think there's Wine Wars from Blood and Wine, which is also one of those that it's super dynamic, it's super cool, and I also listen to it. So those are mine, those are yours. Anything else?
I think that's it.
All right. So as always, remember, comment, like, subscribe. Let us know what you're thinking about the episodes. If you want to see someone specific in these two chairs, let us know. We'd like to have, and that's it. Thank you all for watching then.
Thank you so much and see you next time.
Bye.